Wouldn't it be awesome if there was an electric powered camper that was fun to drive around, had a built-in cabin, and enough off-grid power to run all of your electronics? I sure thought so. So I built it. And in this video, I'm going to show you every single step in how this awesome camper was built. Then we'll load it up with gear and take it out for a beautiful night full of delicious foods, intense rain, fun adventures, and so much more. And it all starts with a big old pile of wood. And this time, some metal square tubing as well. Step 1. Let's build the frame. I lay out the basic shape with the square tubing on the floor. Then I can take some bolts, some washers, and nylon lock nuts and begin to attach it all together. For the middle section on the frame, I came up with the idea of getting one size up on the square tubing so I can slot it over each side, thread in some bolts, and when I tighten it down, it'll be as strong as one piece. After adding another beam along the center, it's time to introduce you on how I planned on steering this thing. Meet the scooter. That's right, I'm going to be using this as the front fork, or that's what I wanted at least. You see, I used a scooter in one of my previous projects where I built a mobile desktop, and honestly, it turned out fantastic for that, so I was hopeful to do the same for this one. But as you can probably tell by the thumbnail and the intro, let's just say the scooter may or may not have had some catastrophic failures later on in the build. The first hint I had that it might be a problem is when I cut off the backside of the scooter with this bandsaw, it cut through the metal like it wasn't even there. It definitely made me concerned about how strong it was. But hey, when you get a scooter and you cut off the end of it, you're going to at least try it and see if it works. After attaching the scooter front to some square tubing, I slide it in place, add on some other metal support beams, and then I bolt the frame nice and secure together. With the basic shape of our top frame complete, it's time to introduce you into how we're actually going to get this thing moving. Meet the motor. This is a 48 volt 1000 watt brushless motor, and I originally planned for just this powering the thing. But then I took a closer look at the pile of wood and it got me a little bit worried that it was maybe a little too heavy for just that one motor. So I ended up getting a second motor. But then I really took a good look at the pile of wood and I did the only logical thing. I got 2 more motors. And there we go. For these motors, 4000 watts of power, it should be more than enough to get this thing moving. I want to connect the motors together into 2 axles, but in order to get it to work the way I want, I do have to open up each of the differentials, spilling oil everywhere so that I can have access to the inner central gears. Because as these sit now, these are open differentials and I need to lock them down. And the easiest way I have to do that is to grab my flux core welder and just weld all the gears in place so that they can't move. And I went ahead and did that for all of the gears inside of each of the differentials. Then I can reinstall all the gears, make sure that they still spin. I apply some new gasket maker because I did rip a bunch of the old ones. Then I could reinstall the motor top, bolt it all together, fill it up with some new oil, and we're good to go. And I gave the same treatment to all the motors. Now it's time to worry about how we're going to connect these together. And I'm going to be using some black steel pipe and some pipe flanges. And the flanges do line up pretty nicely with the sides of the differentials, but sadly the holes don't line up the same. So I'm going to be using one of the gaskets that come with the differential as a guide so I can mark all of the pipe flanges. Then I can pop them in a vise and start the fun process of drilling through cast iron, which is always so much harder than it looks. With all of our holes drilled in, I can screw them onto each end of the pipes. Then I can grab the welder and make it more permanent. Looking good, but they could look better. So let's give it a nice coat of paint. And I got this. This is like farm equipment paint. It's a wonderful color and it should be pretty heavy duty stuff. And the minute I opened it up, all I could think about is how much this stuff looked like that nacho cheese dip that you'd find at a store. Except this stuff kind of smells like glue. I give each of the pipe sections a nice solid coating of the yellow paint and let it dry overnight. And the next day, these things look great. All they're missing now is some motors. Before I bolt everything together, I take some duct tape and place it on the back of each of the flanges to act as a bit of a gasket and a protector, just in case there's any debris inside of the pipes. Then I go ahead and bolt them down to each of the motors. Now for how we're going to get some wheels on it. I got some of these axle kits that fit perfectly in our differentials. They're pretty sweet and they're super easy to install. You just place on a gasket, you slot it in place, then you throw in some bolts, and just like that, we have our axles complete and ready for some wheels. And I got the perfect wheels for the job. I originally got these wheels to fit on my cabin build, but they were too thick to actually fit on, so they've just been patiently waiting for a new project. And the wheels are super easy to install. You just literally slot them on the ends of the axles, you place on a large nut, and you tighten it down. And that's it. With the wheels attached, the next thing to do is to attach our two axles together. So I grabbed some more square tubing, and using the mounts on the axles and some bolts, I go over to each side and I bolt it all together. Then I can take some more square tubing, which sadly doesn't line up perfectly since it's a weird length, so I have to drill out a couple holes in it. Then I can reinstall it, adding some other pieces for support as well to really strengthen out this bottom part of the frame. Now for how we're going to attach the bottom frame to the top frame with some of these shocks. And these are some heavy duty shocks. They're supposedly rated for like 1,000 pounds, so they should work perfectly. And to install them, I got some of these shock mounts with some holes in them that can just easily bolt to the frame. So I go around and attach them to the bottom part of the frame. I bring over the top frame and attach some mounts to that. Then I just test fit everything to make sure I like how everything lines up. Once I'm happy with it, I can remove the top and give it all a nice coat of yellow, ensuring I cover every single inch of it with some of the yellow paint, which should give it some nice resistance to any of the elements and also make it look nice. And I gave the same paint treatment to the bottom part of the frame. And the next day, it looked good enough to cut in half, grab a piece of it, and throw it on a cracker. But honestly, I think it turned out looking fantastic, way cooler and better than it looked without any paint. Now that the frame has its fresh new look, this is the part of the build where I wanted to try to address my concerns with the weakness of the front scooter frame. So I ended up getting some anchoring cement. I've never used anything like this before, so it's as good as time as any to start. And honestly, mixing it up kind of just felt like I was making some bread or something. But the plan is, I'm going to take the mixed cement, pour it in with the funnel to all the tubes inside the frame so that when it hardens, it's going to solidify and make it way stronger and give it the best fighting chance it has. And the next day, when the cement's all dry, it's time to reattach the top and the bottom together. And this time, I'm going to be using the proper hardware. I got some nuts, some bolts, some washers, and I even got some of these rubber washers which I'm going to use, which are hopefully going to minimize any sounds of metal clanking when I'm driving it around. When installing it, I install the bolt, the washer, the shock, then another washer, and then I tighten it all together. And I do the same thing for the top mounts, and all the way around to all the other shock mounts as well. Now that the top and bottom of the frame are connected, it's time to head up front and reinstall the fork, but not the one it came with. I even went out of my way to source a new one, complete with its own suspension, and I even made sure that it measured and lined up so it fit exactly inside of the old head tube. I even managed to find a heavy-duty wheel wheel that will fit inside of the fork, and I got myself a set of bike pegs so I could screw them on the axle as well, so I'd have a nice place for my feet to rest when driving it around. I'm still proud of how the scooter frame front end turned out, but we'll be back. Now that it's got some wheels, you can probably tell that right now it's still not very comfy if you're looking to camp on this thing. So that's what we got to do next. Let's start to build the enclosure, starting with the floor. And for the first layer of the floor, I'm going to be using this. This is some 2x12 board. It's some pretty heavy duty stuff. Since this is going to be the first layer that's exposed to the elements, I got my hands on some marine grade wood sealer. That should be perfect for protecting the wood from rain and snow and just making the wood last a whole lot longer. In order to maximize the most of the space I have, I make a double layer, adding on the other floorboards, which are just some 1x12 boards the lengths of the camper, and I coat those with the sealer as well. Once the boards are dry, I can take the 2x12 boards, line them up over the camper, ensuring that they're evenly spaced on both sides, and then I clamp them down to the frame. Then I take a drill bit, one that can fit in through the holes in the frame, so that I can use the frame as a guide when I drill up through the wood. Then I can drop in some bolts through the wood in the frame all over the boards. But as the bolts sit now, the heads stick up out of the wood more than I'd like, so I'm going to take a Forstner bit, go around to each of the holes, and just drill out a little indent so that I can place a washer, the bolts, and then it'll sit nice and flush. I give the same treatment to all of the other bolts, and then I tighten everything down to the frame. Now that we have a strong base to attach our structure, it's time to bring on the real floorboards, which are those 1x12 boards I stained earlier. I clamped them all down into place after lining them up, grabbed a big old bucket of screws, and began the process of marking, pre-drilling, and screwing in all of the screws through the floorboards into the 2x12 boards underneath, ensuring our floor is going to be nice and connected to the frame of the camper. Only 192 screws later, and we have ourselves a nice floor on our camper. Awesome. On to building the top part. For the main support beams of the top section, I'm going to be using 2x4s that I cut to length. Then to hold them all together, I got a bunch of these metal brackets. They just make making box structures super simple. You just place them where you want, slot in the 2x4s, add some screws, and you have yourself some very strong corners. Super easy. I head over to all the other corners and install those brackets as well. Then I head to the top where I can attach some brackets to those beams. Then I slot in some support beams running the length of the structure and tighten it all down with some screws. With the basic frame complete, there was something that I noticed. It's angled down more than I'd like. I'd like it to be more level when I'm using this thing, so I'm going to address it now before it gets any heavier. And I'm going to do that by heading up to this front fork section, and I'm actually going to cut it off and drop it down a couple inches, using some more square tubing. I lift up the front end and put it on some jack stands just so there's no weight on the front tire. Then I can head underneath with the square slotted tubing and easily install it with just some bolts and some small pieces and tighten it all together so we have our strong little drop down. Then I can take my portable bandsaw, cut off the old front fork section, place it on the drop down and bolt it together. Then I hit it with a little bit of the yellow, and now we have ourselves a nice level camper. Much better. Let's finish building out the rest of the frame. For all of the 2x4s for the side supports, I'm going to be installing with these, a whole bunch of these metal joiner plates, and I have so many of them, it honestly feels like I'm holding a deck of cards. But these are going to be super easy to install. I just place them on the end of the 2x4, screw it in place, and I put one on each side. Then I can drop in the board and put in some screws on the other parts of the joiner plates to ensure that the board's on there nice and secure. Then I can take all the other side supports, slot them in where I want them, and screw them all in place. For installing the roof supports, I just make sure they're lined up with where I want them, and take some large screws and screw them in directly through the frame on both sides. And I repeat the process for the roof support on the front. I grab a couple more 2x4s, which I screw onto this front area right here, which are going to later help when installing the door. Let's get a roof on this thing. I take some more 1x12 boards and slide them in place, and I designed this camper so it's going to be exactly 4 of these boards wide, just to make it a little bit easier on myself. I make sure I mark and line up each of the places above the support beams on the roof, so then I can take a whole bunch of screws and attach all of the roof panels so that they'll never come off. Looking good. Next, I head over to the back wall where I layer up 4 of the boards and screw them into place. Then I head to the front and install that wall just the same. You may have noticed by now, but the top structure, it's not actually attached to the frame of the vehicle. If you want, you can just move the thing off, and that's really not what we want. So let's join them together, and to do that, I got a bunch of these heavy-duty metal corner brackets, and I left the 2x12 sticking out a little bit so I can set the brackets on top. Then on the bottom, I'm going to take some of this double-sided tape so that I can stick it firmly in place. Then I can take a drill out each of the holes, pop in some bolts, and tighten them down to the frame. And the layer of tape is also going to act as a bit of a cushion and really squish down the brackets when I tighten them down. After attaching them to both sides, our frame is now firmly attached to the bottom and there's no way it's coming off now. Let's get the rest of the walls up. I layer up all the boards on the front, do the same for the back, and screw everything down firmly to the frame. With all the walls on, we're still missing one major component, the door. So let's start building that. I lay out some 2x4s on the ground. Then I can take some of these little metal corner braces, place them on each of the corners on the door, and take some screws to hold them in place. And this is just going to ensure that my door is nice and square. Then I can flip it over, grab some of the 1x12 boards, grab a whole bunch of screws, and screw it down to the frame of the door. But no door is complete unless it has some hinges. So I got some of these heavy-duty stainless steel gate hinges. I line it up with where I want it, mark it with a marker so I can drill through the door, then pop in some bolts and tighten it down to the side of the hinge. Before I install the door, I do have to add one more layer of board along this side here so that the hinges line up even with the door and the frame. Now I can grab the door, bring it over to the rest of the frame, mark where the hinges are, drill through the holes, put in some bolts, and tighten it all down to the frame. We're one step closer to our camper being completed. There's still a few places around the camper that I want to cover up with some board just to make it look nicer and fill up any little voids, no matter how funky the shape. And with that, all the exterior wood pieces have been added on. So now it's time to give it a coat of protection. After making a nice little mess all over the floor, it was time to take the stain and cover the whole surface of the camper, on all of the exterior, all of the sides, on the inside of the door, and on the inside of the camper, while trying to avoid drips dripping down on my face. And the next day, when the sealer's all dry, I honestly think it turned out looking fantastic. I really like the color, and it should have some nice wood protection as well. But we're still missing a couple more things, like for one, some windows. And I found some pretty cool windows for this project, like these rectangular porthole windows. I also have a circular porthole window, and I also even have one of these half dome windows, which is like for a fence that you put in for your dog. I'm starting with the circular porthole window, and I want to install it on the front of the door, so I measure and mark in the center. Then using the front plate that comes with the window, I trace it like a stencil on the door, so I can drill a hole through it, take a jigsaw, and cut out the shape. Then I drill out the space for the drainage port, and also drill in the hole so I can install it through the door. Then I can slot the window in place and hold it there with a clamp. But before I put on the top part, I'm going to be taking some clear silicone, putting it all around the edges of the window just so it makes a nice waterproof seal. Then I thread in some machine screws, put on the top ring part, and tighten it down. And now we got our front window installed. And I know that I technically installed it upside down, but I just like these windows better when the window pane opens up folding down. Now it's on to the back, where I'm going to install the rectangular window in the same manner, cutting it out, sealing it up, and tightening it down. Looking good. I still have one more of these windows, so I pop out a hole on the other side and install one on there as well. And the last one to install is the dome window. Just like the other windows, I cut out a circular hole with the jigsaw, drill out some holes to mount it, then I cover all around the window with some of the silicone so I can pop it in place, throw in some bolts, and tighten it down. And just like that, we got all of our windows installed. Perfect. What good is a door if it doesn't have a handle? So let's do that next. And for the handle, I got this. It's supposedly stainless steel, it has a lock on it, and it comes with a key, so it's going to be perfect for this build. In order to install the handle in the door, I'm going to have to reposition this bracket to up top because it is in the way right now. You can also see when I hold up this door jig, there is a big gap right here, which is something we don't want. So I have to take a piece of 2x4, clamp it in place, then from the other side, I screw it down back to the door, and I throw in some extra screws along the middle beam as well. Now I can take the door jig, line it up with where I want it, clamp it in place, so I can use a hole saw to drill out the hole for the handle. Just a little bit dusty. Now on the side of the door jig, I can take a smaller hole saw and drill out the part where the lock's gonna fit. With the holes drilled in there, there's still a little bit of modifications to do. Like for the lock plunger, I have to trace around it, then I take some chisels so I can make a little indentation in it so that it'll actually fit flush with the door. The other part that I have to modify is my door is actually thicker than a standard door, so the handle won't work because it's too thick. So I have to trace around the handle, take out the chisels, and chip away at the area a little bit until it's thin enough for the handle to engage. The last part to modify is to drill out a hole in the side of the camper so that the lock will actually catch. Before I install anything, I take some more of the sealer and cover up all the areas that I modified just to ensure everything is nice and protected. Then I can go ahead and install the lock catch plate with a couple wood screws, then the plunger in the door, and the handle on the door as well, tightening it all down. And just like that, our door's got a handle. It opens and closes perfectly, you can lock it whenever you like. It's the perfect handle for the camper. Works like a charm. Now we're at the point of the build where I noticed something funky was happening to the front fork of the bike. It was a little extra bendy, and when I went to explore it a little more, I noticed something. I was really hoping it was just a bit of cracked paint, but I took out my angle grinder to dig a little bit deeper and it's cracked. It's broken and this thing won't hold the weight. And to be honest, I was super bummed about it. I put a lot of time and effort into making this front fork work. But sadly, I had to remove it and do the only thing that I could do. Give it a proper burial. Nah. I just ended up going back to the store and buying a whole bunch more square slotted tubing. It may just be a pile of metal, but I know our answer's in here somewhere. So let's get building. I didn't really have much plans for this part, so I just went around and played with some shapes. And the wonderful thing about using this square slotted tubing, it's almost like a giant set of Legos or like Connects or something. You can just put the pieces together, throw in some bolts, and you can make some really strong shapes. Now for rebuilding the new fork. I ended up getting the thickest square tubing that they sold and began putting the pieces together. Then I brought it over to the new front end section just to test fit it and see how I liked it, and you can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like. After adding on a couple more pieces for strength, it was time to build the suspension, because there's no way this thing wasn't going to have suspension. The old version had it built in, so I'm going to make my own version. I really like the idea that the different size square tubing can slide inside of each other and move up and down super easily, so I'm going to take advantage of that by installing some shocks on the sides. I cut the square tubing on the fork so it's the correct height that works for the camper. Then I could begin to install the shocks. I take some bolts, a whole bunch of washers as spacers, then I slot it into each section of the square tubing and then bolt it down in place. And this will act as a suspension as the tubes can move up and down and the shocks will hold them in place. In order to install it on the front end, I'm going to need a pretty serious bolt. So this is a grade 8 bolt. It's 5/8 inches thick and it's super heavy duty, because this is the main connection point between the front end and the fork. In order to install it, I have to drill out a 5/8 inch hole on the opening on the front. Then to add more strength in the front end, I take another piece of square tubing with a large hole drilled in it so I can slide it in the center, place in some bolts and tighten it all down. Then I can take the fork, the large bolt, and install it with some washers to the front end of the camper, using a hammer to gently help it into the hole. And on the bottom side, I place a washer, a lock nut, and a nut, and I tighten it all down. Now for the bottom of the fork. I take some small pieces of the tubing to act as a spacer, which are going to help when installing the tire. I ended up removing the bottom parts of the shocks just because it was easier to drill through it, because I had to drill a 1/2 inch hole through the bottom of each of the pieces, and that's so I can fit in a 1/2 inch threaded rod, followed by a nylon washer, a couple brass bushings, then the tire on top, then another nylon washer, and then the other bottom of the fork. Then I can bring it back over to the camper and reinstall it. And this is actually a new tire. It's supposedly rated for like 100 pounds more, so we should be good to go. I still had a bunch of leftover square tubing that I didn't want to go to waste, so I ended up going around the camper on different points, just adding little pieces to add a whole bunch more strength. I even went around to all of the old shock mounts and removed them, so I could build my own out of some small pieces of square tubing to ensure that they're a lot stronger. And speaking of shocks, I even went out and got some more. I got 4 more of these. These ones are even longer, and these are going to be perfect for keeping this thing in line. And I'm going to be installing them right around here. I start by building out my own new little shock mounts out of some pre-painted pieces of square tubing so I can slide it in place. Then I head underneath and build out another shock mount under there. Then I install another shock on the opposite side, and I install 2 more in the front section as well. With our 4 new shocks installed, it's keeping this thing locked down in the center to prevent any side fumbling. And if we give it a little test shake, we can see the suspension is keeping this thing right in line. I am super happy with it. Now it's time to head up front, hit it with a little bit of yellow, and we are looking good. Next up, let's get a seat on this thing. And I got a pretty sweet seat. This is like made for a tractor. It has its own built-in suspension. It's a great color and the thing's super comfortable. So let's get it on there. And I'm going to be installing it by using a couple pieces of wood. I line the boards up on the bottom of the seat so I can mark them. Then I can drill out the holes for them. I'm also going to be needing a couple smaller pieces of wood, but before I install them, I'm going to give them a nice coating of the wood sealer just to protect them from the elements. Once they're dry, I bring over the small pieces to the frame, throw in some washers and bolts, and tighten it down to the metal frame. Then I take the other pieces of wood and bolt them down to the bottom of the seat. Then I can take it over to the camper and place it on top of the other pieces. I clamp it in place to ensure it doesn't move. Then I can drill through both pieces of wood, drop in some bolts, and tighten it down to ensure that the seat is firmly attached to the frame. This seat's going to make this a very comfortable ride. I love how it has its own suspension, and the cushions is just fantastic. Now that we have the seat, we're still going to need a way to steer. So, meet the handlebar. And yep, this is the only piece left of the scooter. I got some handlebar mounts that fit around it, and you just fit them together with some small machine screws. Then I bring it over to the front fork section and just bolt it into place. And now we can steer. But I will say that these mounts, they are a little bit gushy. I don't think they're really meant for a handlebar like this, so I'm not too sure if I'm going to keep these ones, but for now, they'll do just fine. Next up, let's get a proper roof on this thing. The material that I'm using for the roof, I've actually used it in the past on a previous project, one of my first really big builds I've ever done, on my little mobile camper box, and I really like this material ever since I used it. It's super waterproof, it's heavy duty, it almost feels like a plastic, supposedly it's fire resistant, and I know this is going to be a perfect solution for keeping our roof watertight. I begin by laying the material as flat as I can on the roof, pulling it tight so there's no wrinkles, and lining it up even with one side. Then I can take a staple gun with some stainless steel staples, and head around to the edges and put some in place. Then for the corner, I take a utility knife so I can cut it and easily bend it around without any wrinkles. I go around to the other sides, putting in some staples to ensure the material is stuck firmly in place. For the next step, I'm going to be taking some of this double-sided tape, running it along the line of staples I just put in along the roof. Then I stick down thin pieces of cedar wood stripping on top of the tape. I drill out some holes and put in some screws all along the piece of wood. I repeat the same process of tape and wood and screws to really pinch down the roofing material to ensure no water or anything would ever cause a leak or the roof to come off. Then I take a utility knife and go around and trim off all of the extra roofing material just to give it a nice clean look. Then I use some clear silicone to fill in the small little cut that I had to make for the corner. I take some more of the silicone and fill in any area that I think water can seep in, including between each of the side panels on the walls. Then I smooth it out with a paper towel and let it dry. And the next day, you'd never even know that it was there. Beautiful. Now that the exterior of the camper's built, it's time to work on the electronics, cause there's some pretty sweet stuff planned for this build. The first component is gotta be the power supply, and for that, I have this, a 48 volt 100 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery. And this battery has been with me through so much. It's been the main power supply on so many of my different builds in all different conditions, and this thing has just been pulling through. So I know it's going to be perfect when powering this build. And the first thing we're going to build is going to be something to hold the battery in place when we're driving around. I take some 2x4s and screw them into the bottom of a 1x12 board. For the middle section, I take an aluminum bar that I drilled some holes in the edges earlier, and I use it as a guide to keep me lined up when I drill through the wood. On the back side, I take some of these T-nuts, which are just like a spiky nut, and I install them into the holes I drilled. I place the 2x4 back on top and screw it down from the other side. I take some threaded rod and screw it into each of the holes. Now for the top, I take another piece of wood and another aluminum bar so I can drill through each of the sides. Then I take some double-sided tape to stick the bar in place. Since the battery is pretty heavy, I wanted to give it a nice cushioned ride, so I got some of this adhesive foam strip and placed it on the top and bottom of the mounts so that it'll be nice and protected. And this works by placing the battery between the two boards and tightening it down with the threaded rod. Let's get this thing inside. And I'm going to be installing it in this back corner here. I take some large screws and I screw them directly into the ground, going through the floor and into the 2x12 boards underneath the frame. And this thing isn't going anywhere. I also want to build an enclosure around it, so I line up some 2x4s on the wall. I drill through the center of them. Then I head to the outside where I find the holes I drilled and screw the 2x4 in place from the outside. I head over to the opposite side and install a piece there just the same. Now I take a longer piece of 2x4 that fits the length of the camper and I screw it directly into the pieces I just attached to the wall. I take another longer piece and line it up with the back wall in the camper and I attach it with some screws. Now to cover it up, I take some 1x12 board that I have to modify and cut out some notches so when I bring it back inside and slide it in place, it's going to line up perfect. Then I throw in a couple screws to make sure it doesn't fall out. And I left it so there's a small little gap here just so all of the electronics have some nice airflow at all time. For the top section of the enclosure, I modify another 1x12 board. This time I do have to make it a little bit longer by adding on an extension that I just hold in place with a couple 2x4s and some screws. Now I can bring it back inside the camper, line it up with the top section, and when I slide it in place, it fits in like a glove. In order to make it match the same color as the interior, I grab some more of the wood stain and give it a nice solid coat. And now we have a beautiful place where we're going to be able to put all of our electronics. Speaking of electronics, I think it's time we hook up our motors, because right now they're unconnected, there's no way to control them, and they're not going to do us any good. In order to control them, we're going to need this, a brushless motor controller. This is a 48 volt 1000 watt controller that works perfectly with our motor, and since I have 4 motors, I'm going to need 4 of these controllers. And I'm also going to need a place to mount these controllers. So I grab a 1x12 board, cover it up with the wood sealer, then I drill in a couple holes so I'll be able to mount it to the frame. I take all the controllers and lay them where I want them on the board. And now for mounting them. It turns out I must have bought twice as many of these metal joiner plates than I needed, so I'm actually going to be repurposing them as some controller mounts. Using the plates as a stencil, I mark and drill out some holes on the board. Then I drill out the holes on the joiner plates as well. I place on a layer of the double-sided tape so I can have a little bit of cushion for the controller. And I add a piece of it on each of the joiner plates as well. Using some washers, some bolts, and some nuts, I tighten everything down to the board. After installing all the other controllers, it's time to bring it over to the back end of the camper so we can connect everything up. I'm only going to be connecting up a couple things to these controllers, one of them being this, a nice little thumb throttle that you can attach to a handlebar, and a simple switch that's going to control the forward and reverse of the camper. In order to send these signals up front, I got some 5-conductor wire, which is just a wire with 5 wires inside of it. I take the throttle signals for each of the controllers and connect them all up together. Then I do the same for the forward and reverse signals. So we have all of our signals running through this 5-conductor wire that I can easily send up to the front. With all these small wires in the open, I want to protect everything, so I got some of this yellow split tubing, and I use it to cover all of the small signal wires to act as a way to protect it and to prevent any snags when I'm driving this thing around. Time to connect up the motors to the controllers, and this part's super simple. You just have to connect the hall sensor, which fits into the socket. Then you just take the 3-phase wires and you just color code them by crimping them together. The last thing to do is to extend the power wires on the controller. I wired up all of the other controllers the same way. Then I could take all of the positive wires and send them up front because that's where I'm going to need them later. Now I can take all the controllers, place them in between the shocks and the middle on the bottom frame so I can hold it in place with some bolts. Then I take a whole bunch more split tubing and some zip ties to cable manage all of the wires neatly underneath the frame. I ran all of the positive wires and the signal wires up to the front because I want to install some switches in this box right here. And this is a nice little box. It has a strong latch on the side, and it also has a gasket underneath the lid, so it should protect it from the elements. I'm going to be installing these switches in the side. They're battery disconnect switches, and they can handle like 100 amps. I'm also going to be installing the forward and reverse switch on the side as well. On the inside, I have a couple small bus bars that I'm going to install, and I'm going to mount them with a piece of wood. After marking where everything's going to be, I use a hole saw to drill out the spaces for the cutoff switches. On the bottom of the box, I drill out a whole bunch of holes down there as well, and these are where the wires are going to come in and out. And in order to keep the wires protected from the elements, I'm going to be installing a whole bunch of these cable glands, which are a really nice way to install some wires into an enclosure without having to worry about water. Now for the bus bars. I take this small piece of wood and attach the bus bars with a couple wood screws. On the back side, I place some pieces of double-sided tape and I stick it down inside of the enclosure. Then on the back of that, I place a few more pieces of tape so I can take a treated piece of 2x4, stick it on the back. Then on the inside, I use a 90-degree drill bit so I can put in a couple wood screws connecting both of the wood pieces together through the plastic enclosure. I install the forward and reverse switch with a couple small machine screws to the plastic on the case. Then I take some 5-minute epoxy, mix it up, place it around the holes for the cutoff switches. I even put some on the bottom of the reverse switch, making sure to cover up the screw holes so that I can tighten them all down. Once the glue dries, it's time to give this thing some proper labels and install it on the side of the camper. I designed it so it lines up with the stud beneath the walls so I can screw it directly in. Time to hook everything up. I begin by feeding in the 2 main wires that are going to be for our power and hook them to the back of the switches. For the output of the switches, I hook them each up to their own bus bar. Then I can take all of the positive wires that I ran back from the motor controllers, and I did label them as well. I can then feed them all up through the enclosure, add on some ring terminals, and connect them up to the bus bar so each axle is going to be connected to its own switch. Now to install the forward and reverse. I have to find the 5-conductor wire that I sent up front, cut it open and split the wires so I can find the reverse signal, and I did make a little cheat sheet as well so I know which color does which. Then I have to extend the wire, feed it up through the switch in the front, and connect it all down. Since I did cut in half and expose the signal cables, I might as well go ahead and connect it up to the throttle, just so it's ready to be installed later. But for now, it's time to do a little bit more cable management, running the main power lines all the way to the back of the camper. Next part to add is going to be some lights, because who doesn't want to have some awesome lights on their camper? And these are super easy to install. I just place in a bolt and just tighten it down to the frame itself. That's the nice thing about building the frame out of this stuff. You can just bolt things on wherever you'd like, including on the front fork. Time to wire them up. Lucky for me, the lights come with its own wiring harness, so it's super simple to connect up. Then I can take some more split tubing to cable manage all the wires in the back. Then I slide underneath, bring in all the cables from the lights up to the front so that I can cable manage it up to the fork. The light harness did come with its own built-in switch, but I want to replace it with my own version, one that you can install on a handlebar, so I go ahead and solder that on in place. Now I can finally take the throttle and install it on the handlebar, and on the other side I installed the light switch as well. Now I can take all the wires running up to the handlebar, covered in some split tubing, using some electrical tape and zip ties to ensure that they never come off. The handlebar is really coming together, but we're still missing one major thing, like some brakes. So I ended up getting this. This is like a brake kit you get for an ATV. There's some hydraulic brakes, so they should have some good braking pressure. Sadly, the brake lines they came with, they're too short, so I have to replace them with some longer ones that I got. And since they are full of brake fluid, I try my best not to make a mess. Once I attach on the new brake lines, since it is a hydraulic system, I have to add in some more oil and bleed the line. Then I head over to the front axle, install the brake caliper with some bolts. Then I can pop the tire back in place and tighten it down. Then it's on to the other side where I install that brake caliper just the same. I grab a handful of zip ties and head underneath the camper so I can zip tie up the brake line all the way up to the front and up to the fork, and then I install it on the handle. And now we got some working brakes. I left enough slack in the brake line so I can still make full turns on the handlebar. Now it's time to hop inside and finish up installing the rest of the electrical components. I take a few 2x4s to build up a small platform and place in some large screws to attach it to the floor. There still needs to be a way to get some wires in and out of this space, so I take a drill bit and drill 3 large holes right through the floor. Now I can take all the power wires and feed them up through the holes and into the cabin, like the negative wires, the positive wires, and the wires to power our light system. I place some cable glands over each of the split tubing sections. Then I take some clamps to screw them down to the back wall, and I cut off all the extra tubing, so we're just left with all of our wires to power our system. For installing all of the other components, I'm going to be using this, which is just a cutting board, but I've used them in a previous project and I just really like using this material. It's fun to work with and I like mounting stuff to it. And I also designed it so it's going to fit perfectly in this back section right here. Now for all the components. The first one is this, a 48 volt 800 watt inverter. And all this thing does, it's going to take 48 volts from our battery on this end, and on the other side, it's going to spit out 120 volts AC, which is the standard US house outlet. So with this, we're going to be able to power a lot of household items. I also have a set of some larger bus bars, a couple 90 amp resettable fuses. I got this, a DC to DC converter. It takes 48 volts from the battery and steps it down to 12 volts up to 20 amps. And this is so I can run anything that's on 12 volts, like our light system. And lastly, another tiny little set of bus bars. Using a Sharpie, I mark where all the components line up on the board, so I can remove it, take a drill, and drill out all the holes. Since the inverter is kinda heavy, I ended up getting some more foam adhesive strip and placing a bunch of layers on the ground so that I can rest it on top of it, place in some machine screws, and tighten it down to the cutting board. I line up all the other components with the holes I drilled, placing some small screws to ensure they're stuck in place. Back to the inside, where I take some more of that foam adhesive strip, stick it down to the platforms so that I can bring over all the electronics and it'll have a nice place to sit. Using some long screws, I screw down the cutting board directly into the 2x4s underneath. Time to connect it all up. I take the main positive wires and connect them up to the fuses. For wiring up the inverter, I thought it would be nice if it had its own battery cutoff switch that I can install on this back wall right here. So I feed the wires up through the back and connect it up to the terminals on the switch. Then I can take some screws and screw it directly into the wall. I add on some split tubing on the wires, then I screw it down with some clamps around the enclosure. Next, it's time to wire up the DC converter, and I send the output to the small terminals in the corner so that we'll always have a 12 volt supply here. I take the wires coming from our light system and hook them up to those same terminals. It's finally time to install the battery. I bring it over to the battery mount, pop it in place, screw in the threaded rods, and before I install the top mount, there is actually a physical button on the battery that I still want to take advantage of, so I line up the aluminum bar with the button, I mark it, drill out a large hole, and I hit it with a little bit of sandpaper just so there's no sharp edges. Then I can bring it back over to the battery mount, place on some washers and wing nuts, and tighten it down. It's on there nice and solid. For hooking up the battery, I used some serious duty wire. It's up there with some of the thickest stuff I've ever used, and it's definitely gotta be. It's gonna be running our whole system. With the main system wired up, I think it's important to turn it on and test it out just to make sure that the wheels even spin. Before I check the wheels, I hit the power switch for the lights in the front, and they're honestly some pretty nice bright lights, and we also have the ones in the back. I lifted up the whole camper on some jack stands so that when I power on the first switch and hit the throttle, we can see the first axle starts to spin, and we can also test out our brakes, which have some pretty nice stopping power. Then I can flip it in reverse, and we can see the front axle now spins in reverse. Then I can flip on the more power, which is going to activate our second axle for maximum power on our camper. Beautiful. I still had a few pieces of leftover square tubing, so I painted this stuff yellow and went over to the front fork just to add on the remainder of the pieces, just to really strengthen out the build. I also decided to replace the handlebar clamps because the original ones, they're a bit gushy feeling, so I ended up getting some pretty serious ones and put them on in place, and I'm definitely glad I did. These are way stronger and there's no movement at all. It's time to make this thing comfy, and I'm going to start by adding this. And this is some 1/2 inch thick gym puzzle mat. The stuff's pretty awesome. It just slots together just like a giant puzzle, but I do have to modify it a bit by trimming off the edges so that it'll actually fit inside the camper. And now we have ourselves some nice comfortable floor. The next thing I want to add are some lights. And these are some camper lights. They have a built-in switch and run off of 12 volts. I cut out a small notch in the housing so that the wires can lay flat. Then I can place it inside the camper and install it with some screws. I install one more of these lights on the other side of the door. Then I take some split tubing to cable manage the wires all the way back to the electrical enclosure so I can hook it up to the 12 volts on the bus bar. Now we can flip the switch to test them out, and we have a wonderful way to light up the camper at night. So cool. I also got a surge protector, and this one's pretty nice. It's got some holes to be mounted, it's got a whole bunch of plugs and ports, and this is going to make using the inverter just a whole lot easier, as I could plug it into the output, line it up with where I want it on the back wall, and throw in some screws to hold it in place. Now I can flip the switch for the inverter, plug something in, and we have ourselves a nice power system on the go. Perfect. Since I did add a couple wires to the back wall, I have to modify the tabletop part by cutting out a couple more notches to ensure that it lines up perfectly with all the new wires. Like a glove. I ended up getting a handful of these, which, believe it or not, are called cheese plates. They're for cameras, and they're just going to be pretty useful for me. So I placed them all around the camper, screwing them directly to the frame, and these are just a quick and easy place so I can mount my camera. I also got a storage net, which are just really useful, and I made sure that this one fits in between my back walls, so I screw in the mounts that it comes with and just slide over each of the corners, and you have yourself a nice little storage solution. Next, I got a handful of these wall hooks, and I go around and screw them to the frame of the camper wherever I think they're useful. I also got 2 of these loop things, and I attached them near the back on the bottom of the frame, and these will be used to hold down my gear in place when I'm driving this thing around. The last thing to install is this tiny little fire extinguisher. This one comes with its own mounting bracket, so I place it in the back and screw it down, then I can pop the extinguisher in and we're good to go. There's only one more thing left to add, and that is our tiny little license plate as the final little sprinkle on top. Beautiful. And with that, it's finally time to load up our camper with all of our gear and take this thing out for a wonderful night. Let's go. Oh my goodness. It's definitely raining a little bit right now. This is a nice little spot. My poor boots and socks are absolutely drenched from running through all this stuff. I'm glad I wore my boots today though. I'm gonna have to let these guys dry out for a bit. Alright, well, we made it out here. It was raining for about half of the drive. I got pretty wet, but it was a blast driving this thing. I don't think I wasn't smiling the whole time. I'm thinking I want to turn the vehicle around though, just so I can not open it up towards a big old bush right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. All right, so something just happened. You can see the tire. It's an airless tire. I got it so it wouldn't pop, but it totally just slipped off of the rim. I think it got too wet, and it just helped it slide off when I was making a reverse. I'm really not sure how I'm gonna get this thing back up. I have a jack way back at the car, so I'm gonna have to probably hike back and grab that thing. A little bit of a conundrum right now. All right, I got no choice. Gotta hike back all the way to the Jeep and see if I can fix this. This is not as fun to walk back instead of driving that thing. It was a lot of fun to drive, but I think it's just a little too wet. When I tried to put it in reverse, it just slipped off of the rim. I got some tools in the Jeep. Let's see what we can do. You can see the path that this thing made though, just sort of tore through here, and I was going pretty quick, and this is some pretty thick stuff down here. My poor boots. All right. I always bring stuff in case something like this happens. There we go. Got myself a little bottle jack. Maybe I'll bring one of these out. And then back here I also have luckily a spare tire, some tools, and then just general 20-year-old Jeep stuff. So Yeah, this was the original tire. I like the other one better because it was supposed to be rated for like more weight, but lucky enough, I have 2 tires. So let's go ahead and slap this one on instead. Got most of the stuff in the backpack, but gotta carry the bigger stuff out here. And of course, I got my ratchet with me. Let's get this thing off of here. All right, up we go. This is supposed to be a flat free tire, but I think this is honestly a little bit worse than a flat. What can you do? Nice. Got our wheel back on there, our new wheel. The wind is starting to pick up a bit. Might be some rain soon, so I think it's time we turn this thing back around. Beautiful. Alright, that took like 2 hours and like 20 mosquito bites to park, but finally we did it. And it looks like it's about to rain in a minute, so I think it's time we head on inside. Alright. Now I got a little bit extra gear in here today, including socket set, got my little bottle jack, I have a wrench somewhere, got my ratchet. Yeah, it looks like I'm going to be using my socket set as a pillow tonight. Anyways, it just started raining outside a little bit. I don't know if you can see drips on the window. I made it in just in time. And now I think it's time to kind of set up this inside, get comfortable, and enjoy the night. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's actually raining a good amount out there right now. Pretty much got the camper set up as well, but pitter patter, pitter patter. And this will be a good test to see how waterproof this thing is. I'm just happy I finally got that tire on like 10 minutes ago. Otherwise I'd be changing it out here. Yeah, I'd be soaked if I was out there. It's like a tropical storm out there, wow. No water coming in though. That's good. I don't know if you can hear, it's starting to slow down a bit. I'm really liking my little lights though, super easy. I don't have to worry about charging them or anything, and they're all just running off of the big old battery underneath there. And speaking of the battery, it looks like we only used 8% of the battery getting out in here, which is pretty good. And I used both of the axles or 4 motors probably for like 80% of the journey. It did really well. I'm happy. I thought we'd have maybe used like 30%, but I guess they weren't even close to being pushed to max. Well, we made it. We're in our new little camper. It stopped raining outside and actually looks pretty nice out there. Maybe we'll get a chance to walk around and see what's up out there. But yeah, here's the camper pretty much all set up. Over here, got my sleeping bag. This is like a hanging garbage bag. Over here, I have my hanging basket, pillow, random like first aid kind of box. Got my little battery fans. Got a fishing pole up here as well. And back over here is all my other gear, camera gear, like food gear, some technology. And I brought myself a nice little squishy backrest pillow as well. And I also have a little backpack up here just hanging out. Still one more step to set up the camper. Oh wow, look at the holes, or I guess the knots. The sun is penetrating the yellow tarp and there's like a lot of sap in here or something because it's like glowing, like a hot spot or something. That's really cool. It looks wild. Looks like it'd be red hot. That's so cool. And I guess those ones aren't sappy enough, but very interesting. That board must just be full of resin and sap. I'm already tired. It was an interesting adventure having to get all those tools, walk there, walk back, and then change the tire. I got eaten alive by mosquitoes when I was using the little jack to lift up the whole thing. Got itchy bites all over, and I found a tick on my leg. But yeah, now it's finally time to relax in our new camper, and boy, it feels so good to finally just lie down in this thing after all the hours of putting together and building it. It's nice to finally just be able to enjoy it, and that's what I plan on doing. I think it's time to make some dinner. Alright, got my little counter space cleared off. This is where we're going to be making dinner and just kind of hanging out at. Got my little surge protector here so I can run my electronics for what we're going to use to cook our dinner. And to cook our dinner, I got this. And no, it's not a giant tea mug. It's like a water boiler. We're going to use it to boil some pasta in here because for dinner, we're going to have ourselves some delicious tortellini and pesto. I think it's going to be the perfect first meal inside of a brand new little camper. All right, of course, I got myself a little watt meter. We're going to go ahead and plug this thing in, pop it in the back. Comes with a little lid, and we're ready to make some pasta. 3 cheese tortellini. Got ourselves a fantastic jar of pesto, a nice yellow pepper, and I got ourselves, I believe this is a serrano pepper. So it should give us some nice heat to it. You can go ahead and turn this thing on. And you can see we're pulling around 700 watts right now. Last time I tested it, I pulled around 650, and it claims to be 600 watts, so it's not really properly rated, but at least my inverter is 800 watts, so it should be able to run this no problem at all. And I left a little gap here for all of my electronics, so there's always going to be some airflow to be able to get in there. It's not like a small little enclosed space. And we should be good and have our water boiling in, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes, something like that. And in the meantime, let's cut up some vegetables. I also brought myself my little portable fan thing. Get a nice cool breeze blowing at me as well, because with that sun out, it's starting to get warm in here. In fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and crack some of these windows in the back. And hopefully the mosquitoes don't find their way in here today. There we go. Got a nice little cross breeze. And got a little fan as well. Amazing. All right. And our little water boiler is doing pretty well right now. I think I'm about to pop in that pasta in a second. Perfect. I'm gonna go ahead and chop these in half. There we go. Wow, that's bubbling quite a bit. I'm actually gonna go ahead and turn this a little bit lower and cut up this little serrano pepper as well. Can't go wrong with some spice. Oh yeah, that pepper has some heat to it for sure. Beautiful. Got our pasta bubbling over here. And I also this time brought a pretty cool little strainer. It's one that kind of pops out. I thought it'd be perfect for this because I think it'd be kind of hard to strain directly from this. It's turning out to be a beautiful day outside, right next to all these nice little flowers as well. And surprisingly, all the mosquitoes have been leaving me alone. Super happy about that. This is honestly super comfy in here. Got my little back pillow behind me, boiling up some tortellini. Got some nice peppers and pesto. It's a beautiful day right now. The rain stopped, the sun is out, got the windows open, my little fan blowing right inside my new little camper. It's turning out to be a wonderful day. I'm super happy about this. Alrighty. These are looking pretty close to being done right about now. This thing did pretty well, to be honest. I'm impressed. Alrighty. This is gonna be a fantastic meal. Let's give this a try. You can't go wrong with pesto. It's so nice to finally actually just sit down, relax, and eat a meal and enjoy it inside this little camper. Because this one was quite a bit to build. It took me almost like 3 solid weeks of just building day to night, just constantly going at it, getting more bolts, getting more screws, kept running out of screws and bolts, and just putting this thing together. And I'm really happy with how it turned out, to be honest. Gotta get me some more of this pasta. That little pasta boiler thing did, honestly, a really nice job. I'm really impressed with that. This is definitely one of my favorite meals out here, and just favorite meals in general. A lot of my projects make some changes, kind of evolutions during the building process. This one tended to have quite a bit of changes during it, mostly because the front scooter part just completely snapping in half. So that was a bit of a bummer, and I was hoping that filling it with the concrete would have given it some strength so it wouldn't have broken, but sometimes things come your way and you make the best of it, and sometimes it's for the better, and that was definitely the case for this thing. So I'm honestly kind of happy that the original scooter part broke, because it gave me an opportunity to build something from scratch, and I think it turned out way stronger, way cooler, and I really like the shocks on it. I like how the tubing, the square tubing, kind of sliding in each other. I think it's a really cool design, and it really got me to push myself and figure something out on the fly, and I think it turned out fantastic. I'm really happy with it, and I'm a little bit grateful that the first version of it broke, because then I got something pretty cool out of it. I just remembered I brought a nice little fancy drink today. Oh man, my poor lunchbox is sweating. I guess the ice pack is hitting its limit. Ginger ale. It's like a very intense, strong ginger ale. Very good. It'll be a nice little refreshing, cool drink to enjoy with our pesto meal. I've never seen another drink open like this. Cool. Cheers, everybody. Oh, dinner was so good. If you are curious about how much battery we used when cooking dinner, I believe we are at 92% before dinner and 86% right now. So what is that? We used like 6% to cook our dinner, which was fantastic. And I've also had these lights on as well the whole time, but really these are like barely any power. These are probably like 20 watts if even. I'm really happy with the setup in here with all the windows. It's really nice. I thought it would feel a little bit more claustrophobic than the last one, but I think this is actually a little bit bigger, and these bigger windows here let a lot of light in here, so it feels nice and open, and the breeze helps as well. It feels incredible. And I like all my little storage things and my little hanging hooks, and my bins always have those bins. And these are just going to kind of move around. For now they're here, but at the end of the night I'm going to stack them all up here so they're just out of my way, so I can just lay and stretch and not worry about like hitting them or kicking them. I want to step outside and stretch my legs a little bit. Oh, hello. I forgot. The old front tire, that thing disappointed me. I don't really think there's going to be any way I can get it back on here. I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I am going to have to bring it back. Can't just leave it out here. Whoa, did it already start to rust? That's crazy. It already started to rust from all the rain today. That's a bummer, and I thought that was a nicer tire. Mr. Grasshopper. Boing. I'm honestly just really happy with how this thing turned out. I was out there for like 20 minutes, and I think I got bit by like 20 mosquitoes. They are just out there in the hundreds. It's insane. I think they like the taste of pesto like I do. I must be calling them from miles around. What can you do? I guess bring bug spray would be smart, but I don't have any today. I'm really happy with how this thing turned out. Something else that I brought out here today is this. I actually kind of forgot about this till just now. And this is actually a piece of the original yellow tarp from a whole bunch of builds that I did. I wanted to think of a way to kind of incorporate it into this build. I was originally going to put it on the roof, but I didn't have enough of it. I'm thinking maybe I'm going to take some of this tarp and put it on this area right here to act as kind of like a little table mat, something like that. But I'd love to hear some suggestions of what you think I should do with this little piece of tarp to kind of incorporate it on this build. Maybe a little piece of art, maybe like a little frame or something. I'm not really sure, but I feel like this deserves a place in this new camper just because This is kind of what I started with, and I think it's important to remember where you came from, and I want to give it a nice little proper place in this camper. So I'd love to hear what you think I should do with this, or how I should incorporate it in this new camper build. I'm definitely happy with how all of the electronics in this turned out. Everything's really clean, nice and cable managed. Got the inverter, all of the fuses, the little 12-volt converter as well, so I can run all my components and my lighting on the inside and the outside. Got my big old battery here, and it held up beautifully. Nothing jostled around or moved when I was taking this up and down hills and hitting bumps. And I like how it's kind of dual purpose. I can go ahead and close this thing, and this is like a nice little dining area, a little table, and beneath it all is all the electronics. And I think it's a really clean setup, and I'm really happy with it. I really am. I'm definitely thinking that there's a lot of space on top of the roof that maybe I want to add something like possibly a big old window, maybe a roof rack, maybe a bunch of solar panels, different ideas I want to play with. But the roof is just like a blank canvas right now on both sides, and I definitely want to take advantage of it. It's honestly a wonderful feeling going from just drawings I had on graph paper to building this thing to actually spending a night in here. It's almost surreal feeling. I'm still getting used to it. It's been a dense couple of weeks just kind of putting this together and building it and getting all these parts, almost like a giant blur, and then all of a sudden, boom, here I am inside this new contraption. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to make these things, and I truly hope you enjoy them as much as I do making them, because I would love to keep building stuff like this and just trying new things and just see where my ideas and inventions can go. And I also just want to say thanks for stopping by and watching my videos. These videos really wouldn't be anything unless people like you watch, so I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate you, and I truly hope you enjoy them. It's such a beautiful day out there. Night and day from the rainstorm we had earlier. That's for sure. It's super calm right now, just no wind. I hear crickets chirping in the background. The sun's just starting to set over there, eating some dried mango, which is like a fantastic little treat. What a wonderful day. As it's starting to get darker, I'm going to go ahead and close up these windows because I feel like all the bugs are going to be attracted to the lights in here. There we go. And honestly, with just these two lights, it's pretty bright in here. I don't think I have to start bringing extra lights, to be honest. It would be nice if there was one more of these lights. If I could maybe put one more over here or something, over this back area. Or maybe up there. Yeah, maybe up there. It's starting to get dark outside, only a couple minutes left before you really can't see anything, and I honestly think it would be a lot of fun if I popped outside, turned on the lights on the outside, you got the front and the back lights, did a little bit of night driving. I know that there's a dock, maybe like a third of the way or halfway back the way we came, and I think it might be fun to drive back there, maybe try to do a little bit of night fishing before we settle down for the night. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. And if I can't see as far as I want to be able to see with the lights, then I'm not going to do it. But I think it'd be fun to at least try. Okay. All right, it's pretty dark. Let's go ahead and flip these lights on. Nice. Oh wow, you can see a whole bunch of bugs over here. But wow, these things are pretty bright. I think we'll be able to see where we're going, hopefully. And on the back as well, got our nice lights. I gotta make sure to pack up everything, including the terrible tire, my poor still wet socks, and my welcome mat. All right, we can head over here, turn on our power, turn on our double power going forward. Now, go ahead and sit down and give this the juice. We are going. Oh my goodness. These lights are doing fantastic. Oh, this is so much fun. The drive seems a lot further at night. Holy moly. That was so awesome. Man, this thing is so much fun. I'm so happy with how that went. I think I got bit by like 1 billion mosquitoes, but it was so worth it. And it looks like everything didn't fall all over the place. Perfect. And the tire, the changed tire stayed on. Awesome. Whew. Oh, I'm sweating so much. It's so humid and hot outside. And now there's a whole bunch of mosquitoes in here because I had the door open for a minute. That was an absolute blast. I had so much fun with that. That was the most fun I've had driving one of these things, hands down. Just charging through the night with those lights, just shooting so far ahead, and those lights are fantastic. What a wonderful experience. There's just like 1 billion bugs. The grass was still pretty wet, so my poor boots are wet again, and my socks got a little wet again, but hopefully they should dry out. But for now, I think we try our hand at a little bit of night fishing. I've never caught a fish myself at night, but maybe tonight's the night. Got my small little fishing pole and my little kit, and I'm gonna be leaving on the lights on the exterior to act as like a lighthouse to the bugs so they get drawn to this and not me. All right, and I should probably actually turn this thing off. Perfect. Oh my goodness. Can you see how many mosquitoes there are right now? I might not be able to stay out here. It is honestly pretty brutal. See what we can do. Maybe standing out at the end of the dock, we'll get lucky and catch something. And maybe the bugs don't be out here so far. Got our tiny fishing pole. We got our bugs all around, but these seem like gnats, which is a welcome sight to mosquitoes. We got our little worm on there. A little bit of night fishing, eh? I don't think I've ever caught anything at night, so we'll see. The fish gotta sleep too. Just very calm waters today. Really not much going on down there. Oh, something bit me. I'm pretty sure I look like I'm just being swarmed by 1,000 insects. Yeah, not much luck today. I think it's time to head on back to the camper. It was worth a try though. I'm gonna flip these lights off and jump inside the camper. Oh, so many mosquitoes. And there's like at least 10 in here from when I opened the door for like a half a second. Was it worth driving out here and trying to go fishing though? Absolutely. Go ahead and lock us in for the night with our mosquito friends. Get out of here. And in case you're wondering, to drive back to the dock, we used around 5% of the battery to get back here. Really nothing to worry about with a battery or anything. Alright, so what do you do if you want ice cream, but it's too hot to keep ice cream? Well, you have the next best thing, and that is freeze-dried ice cream or astronaut ice cream, a Neapolitan one. These things are a lot of fun. I've had one in the past. It's been a while, and I just want to try it again because it's an interesting experience to eat one of these. It feels and sounds like styrofoam. Let's go ahead and give this a little try. Cheers. It's funny. It really tastes exactly like an ice cream sandwich. Just like dry, warm, and spongy. The closest thing I can compare it to is like Lucky Charms, like the marshmallows. They're kind of like those, except they're way more like ice cream flavored, if that makes sense. Strawberry flavored. Cheers. All right, there we go. Got our sleeping bag, and I also did bring a real pillow. Brought my Steam Deck out here. Thought it'd be something fun to do at night, just to unwind a bit. Well, I'm getting pretty tired. I think it's time to call it a night. Everything's packed up, batteries are charging, phone's charging, and we got ourselves a nice comfy sleeping situation. I am exhausted. It is like midnight right now, right around, and it is still very humid just in general, but it feels nice to just feels nice to just relax and lay here. Definitely feels cooler when I'm not running around or hanging out outside or anything. But yeah, it's been a long day, a wonderful day, and I am ready to get some sleep. Get some good sleep, everybody, and I'll see y'all in the morning. Good morning. I can see the little sunspots in the sap areas again. I think that's so cool. It feels a lot cooler and less humid today, which is amazing. Yesterday was a very, very humid day. Well, I think it's time to wake up, get ourselves some breakfast going in a few minutes. You can see my tripod out there and my security camera. I want to go ahead and put away this sleeping bag. I feel like it's going to be a really nice day today. Those hooks are great. It's super useful for all my stuff. I gotta say, I really like this little shelf area. It does a really nice job of holding all my gear, especially when I'm sleeping. Turning out to be a really beautiful morning right now. I can see the lake over here, got some nice trees all around me, and it's time to make some breakfast. And today for breakfast I got something pretty good. I haven't used this thing in a little while. Brought myself my little waffle maker, my electric waffle maker, and we have ourselves our inverter, so let's make some delicious fresh baked waffles. Sounds pretty good to me. Alright, got our waffle mix. We can go ahead and start to heat up our waffle iron, and this thing pulls like 350 watts, if you can see that. Nice. Got some steaming waffles going. Got views of the lake outside. It's a beautiful day, and honestly, it's super cozy in here. I'm always surprised by how much steam the waffle maker puts off. Gotta love the bubble window. Alright, and I'm using the other half, there it is, of my plate. Starting to smell good in here. I really like this little table area right here. I was debating making like a table out of some wood that kind of folds out from the wall with some brackets that lock. But honestly, this is a very nice little area. I don't really know if I need a table like that. go. Just the tiniest little waffle left. Now that is a beautiful breakfast. Unplug, and I might as well switch off the inverter. And you know what would go great with this stack of waffles? Some honey. But this time I brought something pretty unique. Honeycomb honey. There's actual honeycomb in here, just dripping in honey. This is something I've always wanted to try, and I thought it'd be a lot of fun to try it, especially with some nice breakfast food. So let's see how this thing is. Oh, I'm excited to try this. Let's see, does it just pop open? Oh, it does. Oh, that's wild. Is it squishy? A little bit. Alright, I think I'm just gonna take a bite of this thing and see how it is. Oh, wow. Cheers. It's so sweet. It's like very waxy. The closest thing I can compare it to is if you've ever had those like candies that look like little soda bottles that are like made of wax. Kind of like that. It's just like chewing a ball of wax. But yeah, just like a ball of wax. That's wild. I wasn't really expecting that. I guess I really didn't know what to expect. It's so waxy. I guess I'm gonna make a little sandwich from it. Make a little waffle sandwich. That is so sweet. It's honestly really nice inside of the waffles. What an interesting breakfast. Making little beeswax and honey sandwiches with the waffles. But I don't know how much more honey I'm gonna have. I feel like I just had so much sugar. This has been such a wonderful adventure from start to finish, to planning this thing, getting all the parts, building this machine, taking it out here, driving it around. I've had so much fun. I think this is my favorite machine to drive around, especially last night, driving it in the night. It was just such a blast. Had the lights on, bugs flying everywhere, and I was just going at it. You could feel the wind in your face. It was a fantastic feeling, and it was just such a blast to just go in the night. Like I couldn't stop smiling. Absolute blast. A lot of planning and time and thought goes into actually making and designing and building this thing, and it's a completely different feeling when you actually able to sit inside of it and have yourselves a nice little waffle sandwich made out of some fresh honeycomb. It's a unique feeling, and it's a fantastic feeling, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do, because I love building things, and I'd love to keep building things and making things and just trying new things and seeing what I make and put out there. Just gonna go ahead and finish up my fresh waffle breakfast, relax a little bit. I think I'm gonna walk around outside, see what's going on, and I think it's gonna be time to head on back and drive the camper back. It's been a wonderful adventure, and I truly hope you're enjoying it with me as well. Cheers. Little dip in the honey. Alright, cleaned up after breakfast, and it's a beautiful day out there. I think it's time to go see what's going on. Starting to get warm out again. Bright sun today. You can see a little bit of dew on the roof a little bit, but no water got in from all that rain yesterday. You can see we got the lake over here. I might want to try to do a little bit of fishing in a couple minutes. We'll see what's going on. Alright, I have a couple casts, see what we can do. It's such a peaceful day right now. Nice calm summer day. Haha. Caught ourselves a nice little sunfish. Alright, buddy, let's send you on back. After a couple more casts, the fish no longer seemed to be interested in the yellow worm. They seemed to be more interested in what my camera was looking like, and also what my finger tasted like. Well, that's it. I think I'm gonna call it. We caught ourselves a nice little sunfish. I know there's a whole bunch of fish down there right now, but they don't seem to be too interested. And I think it's about time to go pack up the camper and drive on back. All right, not too bad. We caught ourselves a nice little sunfish, a wonderful little end to this amazing journey. All right, got these here, and I can take my ratchet strap and I can hook it to these side hooks right here. Nice. Now these won't go anywhere when I'm driving this thing around. But now it's time to head outside, close this up, and we can get this thing going. I just want to say thanks for stopping by, everybody. I truly hope you enjoyed this adventure with me, from building this contraption to driving it out here to having some delicious food in here, fishing, and just enjoying a wonderful night in this cool little homemade camper. Anyways, it's time for me to head on back, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Onward we go. I found a beautiful little feather. Awesome. Alright, so I just got this thing back inside, and I noticed something weird was going on with this front shock. I thought maybe it was broken, but then I went to do a little bit more inspecting on this back area, and I noticed that the frame, it's out of line now, completely bent. It just must have been too much weight for this metal, which is honestly very surprising. And it did it to both of these sections on the back. You can kind of see there's maybe like an inch and a half difference between this bottom part and this top part when they're supposed to be nice and level. So it looks like I know what I'm gonna have to be fixing up next. Anyways, I'll catch you then.